This week, I gave Evan and Michael the hi-hat, and since I'm a schnook, they made me watch Miller's Crossing to find out what's the rumpus.
Welcome back to How Did You Miss This? A show where we attempt to fill the not-so-shallow graves of our movie-watching history. I'm Evan Toller-Hickey, and with me, as always, Michael Hansen and Krista Shane. And today we are going to be discussing the Coen Brothers' 1990 film, Miller's Crossing. This is one of the Coen Brothers' sort of more slept-on movies, but that said, it is something that The Guardian has called one of the 25 top crime movies of all time. It's one of Time Magazine's 100 best movies since Time Magazine began, and it's a gangster film, a genre that I know that Chris loves. So, Chris, you got to tell us, how did you miss this?
Yeah, I don't know. I honestly don't know that I was even aware this movie existed until it came up on our, list of things to watch, and you guys pushed it up to the top. So, I mean, I'm aware of the Coen Brothers, obviously. In fact, we're going to be watching one of their movies that is one of my favorites in not too long, but wasn't aware that this existed. And I will say, given some of the other gangster movies that came out the same year, it's easy to see how this would have, disappeared through the cracks. But I think both of you have already seen this movie, right? You guys both decided that this was something you wanted me to watch. So, what's the circumstance for you, Evan, in seeing this?
Well, this was a movie that I saw probably about 20 years ago, maybe a bit over that. And I think it may have been one of the first Coen Brothers films I ever saw. And so it has a real special place in my heart in that respect. And also it is, I think, an absolutely beautiful film. It is a good-looking film. It's full of great performances. It's got some very strange bits that borderline on absurdity that make me laugh. And I really like the Coen Brothers. I really like this film. What about you, Michael?
So for me, I saw this, I think, before I realized that the Coen Brothers were the Coen Brothers. I'd seen Racing Arizona way before, but I don't think I ever made the connection. It was only later that I kind of saw it in the context of the greater sort of their collection of movies. This was a favorite from day one. I've watched this many times over the years. I love everything about this movie, and it has not changed. Spoiler alert, has not changed over the years. I still think it's as good as I did the first time I saw it.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of touched on it. This is the Coen Brothers' third movie that they wrote and directed. Maybe before we get into how we feel about the movie, we can talk about how this movie came to be. And I think it's a interesting trajectory because, as Michael said, this is early Coen Brothers. And I think there's definitely a sense of this tying into kind of an arc of stuff that they were making. But yeah, they'd come off Blood Simple and Raising Arizona before this movie, and this is their third creation. And in trying to write this movie, apparently the whole thing came to them out of this idea of just a black hat blowing through a field, and they framed an entire movie around that simple kind of visual, which, I mean, you see throughout this movie. And the wild thing for me about this movie is that, they had the opportunity to direct Batman after the success of their first two movies, and they passed up on the Michael Keaton Batman to go ahead and make this, which for me is just wild.
Yeah, I mean, that's a one of those amazing bits of trivia and sort of a alternate timeline where the Tim Burton's Batman doesn't exist, but the Coen Brothers Batman exists. And that is a very different Batman in my mind. So I'm glad that they went the way they did on this. And this kind of begins to set up that kind of feeling that I have about the Coen Brothers, that they do a serious film, and then they do kind of less serious film, and then they do a serious film, and then they do a less serious film. And this is that sort of serious film, that they do after Raising Arizona, right? And I mean, it's definitely, they are obviously fans of, the gangster genre and the noir genre. There's a Dashiell Hammett book called The Glass Key, which apparently a lot of this is sort of cribbed from to give some of the inspiration for it. They shot this mostly in New Orleans over a 3-month period, January to April 1989, mainly because New Orleans still had a whole lot of old looking neighborhoods. And that really, the feel of that definitely comes across. It cost them about between, I guess, estimates are like $12 to $15 million. The $14 million, maybe the Coen Brothers says it cost less, but it did not do well at the box office. Let's say it cost $14 million in budget. It pulls in like $5 million at the box office, comes out just after Goodfellas. So maybe there had been saturation on gangster films, and right before The Godfather 3 comes out.
Yeah, and not just like after Goodfellas. It came out less than 2 weeks after Goodfellas. Yeah. So it's pretty easy to see how people might have, missed this, regardless of like how good a movie many people think this is. It's easy to see in the shadow of Goodfellas coming out 2 weeks before, where somebody's like, "So you want to see a mob movie? Well, yeah. Which one? Well, it's not that hard a choice, I think, for a lot of people, where you have Scorsese making one of the best movies ever, because that thing was a rollaway behemoth when it did come out. So I mean, it's easy to see how I think for a lot of folks you could have missed this on the initial run. But I think one of the interesting things is it certainly met some positive reviews. I think a lot of the reviews were good, though maybe not like great. I think a lot of people were praising it for how the movie looks, though maybe a little bit more criticism for the story, the complexity of the story, and some of that kind of thing in a lot of the reviews. No award nominations come out for this, but this does pop up in a number of places, as you kind of mentioned, Evan, in top crime movies and some a lot of people's favorite movie lists of all time. This thing sits with a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes, so certainly a lot of good reviews. And I'm curious for each of you revisiting this movie. I think you're both still in love with it, yeah?
Yeah.
100%. Like for me, this is we talked about this in a previous movie. Because of the setting, I think it's aged extremely well. It doesn't depend on special effects. It doesn't depend on sort of something that was so time specific, let's say in the 80s, that then's kind of aged. So for me, that's all held up. And I think also because I think it has like a real homage to these Bacall, Humphrey Bogart type of movies, the dialogue, the setting, and they go so deep into it. I think that also is so ageless or timeless. So I continue to like this. I think I looked for flaws when we went back to look at it now, and I couldn't find it. I'm a huge fan.
Yeah, I'm with you, Michael. And in fact, I think this movie has gotten better with age. I think that this film is such a wonderful love letter to noir, and it looks great. It sounds great. It's just this movie is one of those things that presses all of my buttons of like, ding, ding, ding. This is a movie that I just thoroughly enjoy through and through. Chris, I know you're a big fan of the gangster genre. I know that Goodfellas was one of your favorite films ever. And you were shocked when I had never seen it and sat me down to watch it once a number of years ago. Maybe that was the seeds of this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Little did we know. I mean, I think for me, this movie was okay. I didn't love this movie because I found some of those absurdist moments kind of yanked me out of it kind of forcefully, and I was like, it zigged at the wrong times, and I felt a little bit of whiplash at points. I like, there's just parts that didn't rub me quite the right way for parts of the characters, the story, and like that absurdist comedy that comes in at points. I thought the movie was okay. For me, I don't know that I would recommend this movie to somebody who hadn't seen it, unless you were like, I really love gangster movies, or I really love the Coen Brothers, or something like that, where I'd be like, okay, yeah, I get it. That might be there for you, but I think for the average person, this wouldn't be something where I'd be like, oh yeah, you gotta see this. I was like, it was fine, but I'm not in love.
I'm sorry to hear that. I'm really looking forward to discussing discussing the ins and outs of that for you.
Yeah, no, I'm going to be looking forward to comparing notes with you guys too, because I think some of the things that you guys may have enjoyed may have been the things that were rubbing me the wrong way. But I'm curious for both of you. Like, it sounds like you guys are both in love with this movie. Is this a movie that you recommend to other folks?
I would recommend this to almost everyone, except, again, like this, in some of these movies, the violence thing, you have to be a little bit mindful. There are a lot of parts where it doesn't matter at all, and all of a sudden you have something that goes a little bit over the top. But I think that this one is an easy one to recommend to pretty much anyone, with a couple of kind of like caveats around, because it's got the absurdist things. It's very stylized. But I would have no hesitation to recommend this.
Yeah, I agree with you, Michael. I love this movie. This is just one of those like really good looking movies that is in the center of a lot of people's Venn diagram. So there's a lot of people who could just come together and like sit down and watch this film and really enjoy it. Even if they have like pretty disparate tastes. I think there's a lot of things in there for people who are looking for a very well-crafted kind of grown-up movie. So, yeah, I recommend it to people who like well-crafted grown-up movies.
Well, that's an interesting recommendation technique. So I think we'll take a quick break here and we can get into all the stuff that makes up Miller's Crossing on the other side. And welcome back. So we're going to be talking about everything about Miller's Crossing. So if you don't want this movie spoiled for you, you should run away faster than Bernie does through the woods. All right, so what's this movie about? So this movie follows Tom Reagan. He's the right-hand man to a 1920s crime boss. And as a gang war is breaking out, Tom kind of manipulates the events to pit both sides against each other without anyone catching on. So, I mean, this movie is, as we're kind of touching on up front, it's a very, big tip of the hat to all the classic gangster movies. I think one of the interesting things that I noticed right off the bat first time watching it is definitely the use of like that era of dialogue and slang that they start hitting you with. Like, just how much does that help kind of pitch you into this era of like 1920s gangsters and Tommy guns and prohibition and that whole thing?
I love it so much. I love the dialogue in this movie so much. I love that they're just throwing you directly into really, really heightened and slang heavy words, and you have to sort of decode it as you go along. And it is an absolute delight to my ear.
Yeah, one of the things that I find about not just this movie, but all of the Coen Brothers movies is that they really are consistent. They decide what type of movie they want to make, and then they stick with that throughout. So to me, it doesn't matter so much whether they did the slang or not, but they're really consistent in the application of it. And the dialogue has a certain tone throughout. It's very sort of that, like I was saying, the Humphrey Bogart type of thing where there's an edge to every interaction back and forth. Guys talking to each other have a certain ring to it, and so the slang itself it's not as important to me as how they do it, and they stick to a particular tone throughout. And I think that is part of the success. It doesn't veer left and right. It sets a tone and it sticks with that tone. And I love it for it.
I will say, seeing this for a first time too, I can definitely, for me, looking at some of the other Coen Brothers movie that came later, and I look at this and I'm like, okay, this feels like their first foray into like, we're going back in time, we're picking a particular group of people with their particular dialogue, mannerisms, and like you're saying, Michael, like they go all the way into it, similar to how you would see them go into Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, or Fargo, or like these very like specific people in a specific time, and we're just going to like make it look, feel, and sound like that. People are going to talk a certain way, behave a certain way. Like I can definitely see that connection, and I think it is fun at points where you're like, what does "what's the rumpus" mean? And you get it, but it's also like, really, people said that? Huh? How about that?
Yeah, people say it in the movie anyway, and that's what matters, right? Because the Coen brothers, like to Michael's point, are setting up a very specific, consistent world. And so in doing so, you've got this shared vocabulary. There's nobody in the movie who's like, what do you mean? Give me the hi-hat. Let me get my gangster to English dictionary out. And it means disrespectful. I get. Okay. It's everybody is trading in these verbal blows, and it's just great. I love it the same way that I love the way that they do sort of like chill stoner dialogue for the dude in Big Lebowski, or the way that they do language in True Grit.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. It's like, and we see it in even, I don't know, Blade Runner, the original one, or any of these movies where their words are invented and you totally get the context of it. You get what it means. You get the sense of it. And if it's done in a way that's consistent with the world, you just go with it. Like, look at Racing Arizona. Racing Arizona has a style of dialogue that's very different from this. It is very absurd, but everyone sticks to it. It's not just one character who's all out there and then everyone else kind of tries to play a different type of character. It's like, no, the tone of it is set up front. Everyone knows the world that they exist in, and they just go with it. And that's what I think that this one does, maybe with more of a serious thing, grounding, but it still is the same. This is the sort of movie that we want to make, and they just go for it, and everyone knows what type of movie they're in, and I just love being part of that ride.
I will say that same. So like you're saying there, Michael. I think you get a good sense of the characters who are kind of consistent in the way they speak. The dialogue they kind of bring to it is very representative of some of these very like unique characters, especially some of them who have these like over the top personalities. And I will say some of the exchanges, some of them feel like some classic gangster movie kind of 1920s gangster bad guys. I think one of the things for me as we went through it that, and this is kind of maybe where I had some of those moments where, I bumped up against some of the writing, was some of those like comedic or absurdist elements as we go through the movie. So for me, just thinking about one of the ones that stuck out was when Johnny Casper's kid comes in. And he like smacks him or whatever. And you're like, is this supposed to be funny? I don't know what this is. And it doesn't seem serious enough because it seems like they're playing it for laughs. But it also, for me at points, kind of rubbed up against what I felt was like the kind of like seriousness or the stakes that seem to be going on in this movie, where it's like, all right, Tom's playing for keeps. He's playing for his life here. He's got it. And then you got these just kind of like weird moments. And I'm curious for both of you, because I think for both of you, they resonate a little bit more. Like there's a few scenes where you've got when, Tom's getting the lights punched out of him by Leo in the club, and then he runs into the woman who like screams and is like whacking on his head with a purse, and the warehouse scene where he's gonna get beat up by the guys and he whacks the guy in the face with the chair, and then instead of it kind of turning into a fight, he's like, Jesus, Tom. And he like just walks out of the room and walks back. Like there's parts that are like, I think, played for laughs, and those didn't always land with me. But for the two of you, are those moments where you're like laughing, like enjoying those kinds of things?
Jesus, Tom is one of my favorite moments in the entire film. I love that beat so much because it shows that Tom really does feel like he is in the fight of his life, and he's going to do what he needs to do no matter what. And the goon who knows Tom is like, it's just business. And so much of this story, a lot of it is it's just business. And so it's like, oh no, you did the thing that you're not supposed to do. It would have been okay if you had like tried to sucker punch me, but you hit me with the chair. Jesus, Tom, now I got to go out. I got to get the other guy because I know you're just not going to take the beating. And man, all right. This is how it's going to go. And so it's this, to me, it's so funny, and it gives that little bit of breath before the tension gets ratcheted right back up. And I think that that's what a lot of these little absurdist moments do, is they give a moment of intake of breath, or a little bit of emotional gear shift, so that the next beat can maybe hit a little bit harder. There's some that I'm not a huge fan of. I don't love the woman screaming in the club and hitting him with the purse. But I think that Casper's son is hilarious, and him coming in the sailor suit in the first scene that you see him is so delightful to me. And it also, when he smacks his kid in the second scene you see him in, it gives an insight into Casper himself. And I think that that's an important character insight.
I agree. That's how I separate the two as well. I think that the what you mentioned, the woman in Leo's club, that's a little bit like a Marx Brothers type of a scene. That's probably the one where I would say it doesn't fit in the way that everything else does. That scene when he's beaten up and he hits Frankie with a chair, that same with me. Laugh out loud. I think it is so funny because the preparation, the seriousness, and how he just quietly walks away. And then this older, smaller Italian guy comes, and he's just like proceeds to beat the snot out of him. Like that to me is that is funny. That is all out funny. And I couldn't agree with you more about just how these things can help you tell about Casper's character, because then later when he gets into this thing around like, look, to be honest, the Dane mentioned we should do this, we should double cross you. But if we did that, like, where would we be? Because there are these principles, there are
ethics.
Ethics.
Yeah.
That to me, like it is so consistent. But that one scene in the club and the hitting with the purse, that probably is the one I would have said I'm completely okay without, because it just tonally doesn't fit quite the same. It's a bit more farcical. But otherwise, for sure, I'm all in.
Yeah, it is interesting because I found there's a few. I actually don't mind the one with the chair. It's just I found those moments where where they were playing for the laugh or the absurdity of that moment in the middle of what feels like a high stakes thing. Is Tom going to get like murdered by Leo in the middle of this club? And then you get this woman bonking on the head and like, running around. You're like, oh, that's a little weirdo. Hey, is Leo going to escape this life or death assault on him in his own home? Well, good thing that his Tommy gun has 14,000 bullets in it. And when you shoot the guy with it for like a minute straight, he just jitterbugs all through the house firing his Tommy gun. There's a few moments where I'm just like, ugh.
You know what?
Nope.
I love the Tommy gun jitterbug. And I think that is a solid contender for best death. right up there with Brendan Gleeson in Bruges.
But before you leave that scene to me is like a masterclass, because the setup with the music, the panning of the camera before you know what's going on, but then you realize what's happening because you hear the death throes, you see the person laying there, you see every step along the way that Leo goes through in terms of, hey, hang on, and then he doesn't panic. He even takes the time to put on his slippers, and then everything about that is just perfect. I don't even get distracted for a second about the like you say, the unlimited ammo perk that he must have picked up just before that happened. But I just think that is like a perfect sequence.
So it's
literally.
It's interesting to me because if you were to compare it against, say, the end of The Godfather, where you have this well-crafted series of murders going on to a piece of music, and you're like, okay, for me, it's just the absurdity of those little bits and pieces that, again, for whatever reason, make me lose the stakes in the scene.
Okay, so two things there. I would say that is less like the end of The Godfather and more like the halfway point of The Godfather, where there's a guy who gets riddled with a bazillion machine gun holes, and then leave the gun, take the cannoli, right? Like that to me is much more like this. And then also, whereas like the hat is kind of the symbol of Tom, I feel like the Tommy gun is the symbol of Leo. And it's less about him having kind of unlimited ammo. And it's more that we're seeing an extension of his character here that is just so brutal and so violent and so red hot. And that is what that bit of the scene, that and him walking down the street, not getting hit by bullets and firing on the car, that
just endlessly.
Yeah. Like all of that to me is much more about Leo and Leo's character rather than it is about the real physics of the world, if that makes sense.
But I think we had a little bit of this conversation before. Like, think about a movie like In Bruges, or actually even the town itself, where we kind of had a hard time saying, what sort of movie is this? How do you market it? How do you classify it? Is this a gangster movie just because it's about gangsters? It's certainly not a gangster movie the way that Goodfellas is a gangster movie. It's not a gangster movie the way that Scarface is a gangster movie. This is more like a character movie about relationships between all of these different characters that have to do with friendship and honor and love and all of this. It just happens to be set in a gangster setting. But how do you market that? So, when they came out, no doubt people would have had the same type of challenge that you're talking about. Where how do I interpret this scene? How do I look at it? How am I supposed to see this? Is it a comedy? Like what is this thing? And walking away completely confounded.
And not only that, but because this is the Coen Brothers' third film. And so at that point, you don't have enough of an oeuvre, to be built up for it to be like, oh, it's a Coen Brothers film. Because as different as a Coen Brothers film as this feels, it still feels very much like a Coen Brothers film to me.
Yeah, I think you can definitely draw the connect the dots down to other pieces of work and that they do later, including you've got Fargo and No Country for Old Men, which are both crime movies of very different flavors, but I can definitely see the ancestry or the lineage or whatever you want to call it, going back to this film. I think one of the interesting points that Michael kind of touched on is this movie opens with that meeting between Leo and Johnny Casper. Johnny Casper's laying out what this movie is kind of about, right? Like ethics, like who can you trust, and like what who can you really trust if you can't trust somebody, and all that kind of stuff. So I'm interested what both of your kind of take on this thing about like ethics and friendship and loyalty and these kind of things. Like, is this a movie that thinks, at least in this setting, that there is friendship and loyalty and ethics?
I mean, certainly it seems that it thinks that there's love. And I think that is kind of at the core of this film, not the love between Tom and Verna, but the love between Tom and Leo. That seems to really underscore the whole story for me. This is a tragic love story, that Tom does all of these things for the person he loves to make sure that they're okay in the end, and he is left with nothing but his hat. And that's kind of a beautiful thing.
I think almost, with the exception of one character, everyone follows their own code and they have certain things that they stick with. Even the Dane does it because he has this crazy thing. He probably could have cheated Caspar so many times, never did. Crazy protective because of his special relationship with Mink. Everyone's following something, except I was going to say for Bernie.
Except
he
for
seems
Bernie.
to have no loyalty. Nothing is just about him. And everything is transactional in nature, but everyone else has something that they follow, and they seem to be doing it really, really well. Like Caspar as well. He is crazy. He's got a lot of bizarre values, but he has this thing very similar to in Bruges about like, look, rules are rules. You got to stick to your principles. If you don't have that, then what do you have? It's I think it makes him much more believable as a character.
Yeah, I'll say Johnny Casper is my favorite character in the movie. I think he's great. I think for me, he's the one who is appropriately funny, but also like menacing. And like, I'm like, yeah, I love Johnny Casper. And, you know, I found he was probably, for me, one of the better, more fleshed out characters. So I really enjoyed John Polito in this movie. I think he's
and also I was thinking about that when Evan was talking about Leo. I actually think that Caspar is a much scarier character because he's so, you don't know what's going to happen the next moment. You don't know which version of him is going to show up. Leo's Leo. He's super consistent. He doesn't really allow himself to completely explode, even when he, you know, punches out Tom. Like, he doesn't really do it with that type of rage. But when Caspar does it, it's like, okay, that is someone to fear 100%.
And I think that actually ties back to that beat that Chris talked to earlier about Caspar hitting his son, where you don't know what Caspar you're going to get. And so Caspar lashes out and then immediately is like, "Oh, what's the matter? Did somebody hit you? Oh, come on." And it's just like, oh, okay, this guy is scary. And in the death of the Dane, you really see that happen again, where it's like, okay, he's just going to beat him to death with a fireplace shovel.
Yeah.
Woof.
Yeah, I mean, I think John Polito and Albert Finney, we kind of touched on as the two, you know, crime bosses in this movie who Gabriel Byrne is kind of caught between. Maybe what we need to do is take a quick break. And on the other side, we can talk about some of the other performances from some of the other key folks in this movie. And we're back. So, I mean, the headliner, the leading man in this movie, Gabriel Byrne, as Tom. I'm curious for both of you. Like, how does Gabriel Byrne land in that role of Tom, the kind of like right hand man, you know, guy who's whispering in everybody's ear to pit them against each other, you know, finding his way out of trouble. Like, how does that role, you know, how does he land in that role for the two of you?
I mean, I think this is one of his best performances. I think he's excellent in this film. I think he brings a level of intelligence and cruelty and sort of masculinity and quietness, the contemplation that I think is really difficult to balance, and I think that he does it beautifully. I've got no notes on Gabriel Byrne every punch he takes, he's given it his all. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. I think this is the movie where I just said, this is someone I'm going to watch everything that he's in. The tiny things. We talked a little bit about the opening scene in this, where he acts surprised. You can tell his surprise when Leo insists we're going to protect Bernie, but it's restrained. It is just enough that we see it, but he doesn't say, "Hey, what do you mean?" It's just like little things. He is so constrained the entire movie. And he's so held back. He can't express any emotion. He can't talk to anyone about what he actually feels. I don't know. I just love him in this performance. I read about the other people who were considered and they tried out. I can't see anyone else doing this as well as he did.
Yeah, it's an interesting one for me because I found, Michael, you used the word constrained there, and that's kind of the way I felt like he was for a lot of the movie, where it's a little bit hard to get a read on him for most of the movie, which can make him feel a little bit distanced, I guess, from you. Is like he's hard to hang on to as the protagonist of the movie at times, because you're like, is this guy good? Is this guy bad? Is this guy happy? Is this guy mad? I'm making a Dr. Seuss poem without realizing it. But like, I think generally I liked it, but it was one of the performances I struggled with as I kind of rewatched the movie of like, do I like this or do I wish there was more here? Because he doesn't have, he doesn't have the Johnny Casper big swings or the Leo big swings in kind of emotion, right? Like he's always very level-headed and neutral, even as he's about to be murdered by somebody or whatever. He's like, oh, all right, well, let's see if I can talk my way out of this.
And I think that's great because it allows Johnny Casper to be so big and Leo to go big and Verna to go big and boy, oh boy, is Bernie going to go big. And it all comes up against this inscrutable human. And that is Tom. That is who he's supposed to be.
I think I also would agree with you a little bit more if it wasn't for that one scene when they go back into the woods and when he's doing all the calculations in his head, he's trying to hold it together, and then it's like he can't, and he just stops and he throws up. And that is where you know that this is the limits of kind of like what he's able to do. And I think that scene really adds to the complexity and the humanity of him in a very, very good way.
Well, speaking of the woods, I don't think you can think about Miller's Crossing and the woods there without talking about John Turturro as Bernie. And I mean, especially his scene in the woods, like he is putting it in overdrive for that scene. I'm very curious from both of you, like how impactful is that scene when Tom is charged with whacking Bernie out in the woods? Like, what does that feel like after so many watches?
I think it is still very powerful. Actually, maybe even more so. I think the first time I watched it, I think I probably thought I didn't know how to deal with it. It's very intense. It's so much. I think it's much more. I don't know. Like I think I can see it now in a different way, and I think it is incredibly powerful, and also sets the stage then for the later one. It's like, what would you have done anyway if you caught up with me? Like all I would have to do is just squirt a little bit and you would let me go. Like that thing later, I think that the first scene is incredibly powerful, and I buy it completely.
Yeah, I'm with you, Michael. That scene, a man truly pleading for his life, look inside your heart. It's one of the few genuine moments I feel like we get from Bernie. And then to juxtapose that with when he starts trying to blackmail Tom, and it's just the difference in those two performances and the way that he sort of goes from being this man just terrified for his life to like, oh, I've got the upper hand now. I'm going to try to squeeze you now, Tom. To me, it is of equal performance of with like Lemon in Glengarry Glen Ross in those peaks and valleys. I really think that it is a quality performance.
I will say too, it's like I agree. I think, it's easy to see how the Coen brothers wind up working with him a bunch of times after this. In fact, this is the first time they worked with a bunch of people. So not just him, but also Steve Buscemi, who winds up being in a number of their movies, John Polito, who winds up being in a bunch of their movies. And like, yeah, his performance is great. And to that point too, when Tom tricks him again towards the end or whatever, and you see him go back to that pleading, you can understand where you're like, we know what happens now if you get out of this. Like, you can't be trusted anymore. Like, I did you a solid once, you betrayed me. Like, Tom doesn't really have any options at the end, right? Like, yeah, you were very persuasive, and yet, sorry, buddy. I will say that the whole Bernie storyline through there, though, is one of the things that for me gets a little bit tricky. And I think some of the things that were leveled as criticisms about this movie was that the storyline is a little bit overly complicated. The New York Times review from Vincent Canby said something. So it said, the most mysterious thing about this movie is how a movie with such a simple narrative can often be so difficult to follow. And I will say that for me, especially on the first watch, it is a relatively straightforward thing, but I did find myself at a number of points getting a little bit lost of like, who's he talking to on the phone about who? There's a lot of stuff happening off screen about characters who you haven't met or don't know very well. A lot of talk about Mink, who's Steve Buscemi's character, who you meet for like 20 seconds or something in the lobby of the parlor or whatever that's Leo's place. Like, so there's a lot that goes on for me where I found it was very easy on a first watch to be like, who, what, who are they talking about? What's going on? I'm guessing you guys don't find that, but like, is that something that you can, understand how people could get lost on this? Or did you find it was like, no, I get it. It's pretty easy. Straightforward.
Is the story overly complicated? In a lot of questions, it's like a lot of ways, it's like asking, is a chess match overly complicated? Because this is Tom maneuvering pieces all over the place and trying to get everything lined up for checkmate. And we as the audience don't know what's going on. I mean, Tom himself is like, do you know why you do the things you do at the end? And I think that yes, it's a movie that benefits for rewatching and rewards rewatching, and that's wonderful. I think it's great when films reward rewatching. But to me, in terms of like, is it overly complicated? No, we're watching a chess game, and sometimes those moves aren't clear until 3 moves down the line. And I'm okay with that because everything is so compelling in this film to me. How about you, Michael?
It's interesting, right? Like I think I sort of agree with you, Evan, but I'm going to say it is complicated, but the criticism that someone would give, it's not the same as a movie like Christopher Nolan's Tenet. You can say it's overly complicated and understand anything going on with the time mechanism and all this. This is complicated because, like you say, like he's reacting in the moment. He doesn't have a plan going into it. It's just like, I think that meaning Leo, I think that you protecting Bernie is going to get us all into trouble. And it's going to get you, Leo, into trouble, who I care about. It's going to get Bernie into trouble. It's going to get this and that. And at every step along the way, he has to react and readjust and improvise and make it seem like he knows what he's doing. And he never does. So I think it is complicated in that way. Some of the things happening were trickier, Ben, like the character names and who's betting on what, fight or horse or that. But I think a good chunk of that is a reflection of like just he himself doesn't really know what's going on. And so the thing around chess is it's not really just chess because, you know, chess, you would think, well, I'm the player, I'm going to try to defeat you. It's more like chess from the queen's perspective. He is there trying to protect the king, but he's also a player, a piece in the game itself. So it's kind of like you have to balance all of these things in a way that wouldn't be the case if you were just completely nihilistic. You know, it's me against the world. I'll maneuver. I'll try to manipulate everyone. That would be straightforward. Then you just do whatever you need to do to survive. But he needs to also protect these other characters, these other pieces on the chessboard. And I think that's consistent with the story. Complex, yes, but it's consistent with his character.
And I think that, to your point, Michael, there is one other queen on that board, and that, of course, is the character of Verna, played by Marcia Gay Harden, who I think delivers a really excellent performance. I mean, to me, there are no real weak performances in this film, so I will continue to say, you know, delivers an excellent performance. I really like her sort of characterization of Verna and how tough she is and how goal she feels, and that she's in it to protect her brother, and that's what she's trying to do. And she has a very clear goal in what she's doing, and you know, she is not going to be intimidated by anyone except maybe the Dane.
I found Marcia Gay Harden as Verna was good. Like, kind of to your point, Evan, I don't really think there's like poor performances in this movie. I found Verna's relationship with Tom and with Leo, the part where I was left my head scratching a little bit, because I mean, number one, you never really see Verna with Leo until the end of the movie. And so, you know, like there's a few head scratcher, and that's kind of where it's like a little bit of the head scratcher complexity for me. It's not necessarily in the story that they're telling so much as like, well, you never actually see Leo and Verna together. I don't know if they're actually, you know, actually into each other, because Leo seems to be kind of somewhat, even though he's like, yeah, maybe she's playing me. I don't know. And a little bit similarly with Tom too, like you never really get a read on what the actual relationship for these people is, if it is real or if it's not. And I don't know what to make of that. And I think that's where some of the complexity comes in for me at times, where you're like, I'm not sure where to put my thumb down on these things, whether it's real or they're just playing each other or whatever. And I think that's where it got a little bit tricky for me at points.
I think you can look at it two ways. One is that it doesn't really matter in the end about the complexity, because they all have their reasons for doing things. She really is generally trying to take care of Bernie. She's very clear about it. She's saying like, look, this is my brother. I want to protect him. Leo really wants to have someone just in his life, and he's willing to overlook a bunch of things. And the other side is this thing around like also what choice do they have? Tom, I think, really genuinely cares about Verna, but he can't say it. He can't say it partly because, you know, his loyalty and friendship with Leo. And he also, I think, there's something about him where he can't express that to her. It's a vulnerability thing. He can't admit it. So this kind of like they're all held back. And what I like about this movie is like, I think it's not one or the other. I think that Verna can take advantage of Leon to some degree for the protection, but also really enjoy the stability in the relationship. Like, I think they can be both. And like I said, it doesn't matter in the end. I don't think that's the central part of the story, but it is kind of like that underlying thing that just explains why it's so hard for them to do anything. You know, it's not just all about, I'm going to take my revenge on you and kill a person, because it's like, yeah, but I also have this other person. And they struggle with that throughout.
Yeah, it's an interesting one for me, because I think, you know, where I had some of the issues with, like I was saying, like the like, okay, are these relationships real? Like for me, it's a little bit in that beginning where Tom, you know, as he's trying to get things going and like, don't trust Verna, and Tom outs himself to Leo about his relationship with Verna, which then kind of sets off this chain of events. Like there's a few, like that was a little bit of a head scratcher to me of like, why would, like, Tom's a clever guy who's playing people against each other for the entire movie, and yet he's just like, no, because I'm sleeping with her. Like, oh. And there's a few of those things throughout the movie where I was like, I'm not sure I 100% like believe that. So like at various points where it's like, okay, the gangsters didn't check that Tom had killed Bernie, and then they go back in the woods and they find a body and they're like, oh, that must be Bernie, I guess. And you know, there's a number of those beats where I was just like, I'm not sure about that. And I'm like, it's okay, but I'm not sure about that. And I don't know. It didn't have 100% buy-in for me all the way through on some of those. And that's why I struggled a little bit throughout.
That's fascinating to me, because I think that Tom, so the two things there, I mean, one, Tom telling Leo that not to trust Verna because he is the one sleeping with her, is a real last-ditch effort for Tom. Tom is trying to prevent a gang war. And because he feels like Leo will likely lose it, that Casper has become too strong. And that is the one thing that is preventing this gang war just from stopping, is the fact that Leo refuses to back down, because he's going to protect Bernie no matter what. And that's because of Verna. And if Leo and Verna split, then he can disavow Bernie, and then everything can go back to sort of status quo-ish. And so Tom is taking that full risk. That to me was this big character moment of, he is willing to put himself fully on the line here to make sure that Leo keeps his position of power. And
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. Like the way that you say is like, it is not a flippant move. It's not a light move that he makes, because it's a big lead up to it. It's like, I've never asked you for anything. You have to trust me on this. And if you can't, then to hell with you. And it's only after that he says, that night when you came, she was with me. That is exactly what you say. Like, that's what he's willing to do to protect Leo. And even earlier, he says that, like, think about what protecting Bernie will benefit you, and how much it will cost to kind of like go to war with Casper. So I think that is at the heart of it. It's like, it's a huge step for him to do that, and actually it's consistent with him as a character, I think, and not strange at all.
Yeah, and insofar as the body in the woods, I mean, yeah, sure. The mobsters don't walk out with them because they're a couple of dumb mooks. They're just like, they're schlubs, they're schnooks. They're not going anywhere, right? And we find out that body that is dressed the same way that Bernie was dressed when they went into the woods was Mink, right? Like Bernie took him out into the woods and murdered him and shot him in the face, so that he was leaving the body so that people would believe that he was dead. So his own sort of like tying up of loose ends benefits Tom.
Yeah, well, speaking of people being murdered in the woods, probably one of the most notable scenes or shots in this movie is that shot where you've got that long view out towards Tom as he's about to execute Bernie out in the woods. And the thing for me is, this is a movie that definitely looks great. As much as I don't love the story and the characters in this movie a ton, I do enjoy the way this movie looks an awful lot. And the neat thing is, this is the third movie that the Coen brothers made with Barry Sonnenfeld. And like, it looks great.
Yeah, I mean, it looks fantastic, and it's very different than Barry Sonnenfeld's standard kind of look. He tends to use a lot of wide angle lenses and is very frenetic with his camera. The camera is a character in a lot of his work, and this one, with the exception of just a couple little shots, one that comes to mind is sort of flip around that goes from Tom to the bartender in Leo's club. This is a movie that is shot with long lens, really like carefully crafted shots that are really giving just this really beautiful look to the movie. And one of my favorite things in the using of these long lenses that give this incredible depth of focus and depth of field is that scene that we talked about earlier, where the introduction of Tom, where Leo is in the foreground of the shot and he is in focus, and Tom is just a bit out of focus in the background. And Leo even like looks to him and he's, for advice kind of thing. And he's still like, and the camera doesn't focus pull to make Tom in focus. He stays in that kind of little bit of soft focus. And it's like, oh, this is a guy who is in the background. And this is what he is going to do. Like, he is a guy in the background, and that's what he does. He's a guy who does things from the background. And I was like, oh, that is such a great way of telling us visually who this guy is the moment that we meet him. I mean, this film is it's shot so beautifully.
I also think I was very impressed that there's several scenes where you have dialogue, but the camera stays on the one person and doesn't constantly, swap back and forth. There's a real patience in it to kind of show what is that person going through in this dialogue. What are their reactions? What's their thought process? And smart use of colors as well, because it's a pretty muted thing. It's not terribly lit with sunlight and neon. It's a pretty muted thing, so when they do use colors, it kind of feels like it has meaning to it. But no, for sure, like I think that the camera work and the positioning of scenes, it's a beautiful movie.
Yeah, there's a number of scenes too where the way that the film the scene is shot is quite unique too. So as much as, Evan, you were talking about the typical way that Barry Sonnenfeld and the Coen brothers had kind of done stuff, in Raising Arizona, to your point, that frenetic camera where like instead of a zoom in, you can feel the camera being thrust into somebody's face. And it's being done from these weird places, like, very close to the ground, under a bed, under a car, or whatever. You're like, okay, this is weird. I'm seeing things from this weird place, but it's kind of adding this weird extra character. I think the thing that's unique in this movie is, some of the shots that are shot from like right down on the ground. Like when they're in the warehouse and Tom's going to get beat up, and you get this interesting perspective of the goon walking in, but the shot's done from the floor. So you get this interesting perspective. Or as they follow the gangster's feet as they're headed towards Leo's bedroom, and it's kind of following them along the ground rather than, their bodies or their torsos or whatever, watching them get closer. Even in Leo's bedroom, in that scene when it's shot from basically the chandelier down, there's a lot of really cool perspectives that get brought into this. Where you might typically see in that Bernie and Tom scene where Tom's going to, execute him, you might typically see that more from a more kind of pushed in view or over somebody's shoulder with, Bernie down on his knees or something. But instead you get it from a distance and this really like wide view of that scene. So it's really interesting to see the, how you might normally expect some of these scenes to be shot. of menacing figures moving down a hallway. They might be shadowy, but like instead you get their feet, or just how unique that style is. And I mean, like Barry Sonnenfeld, just to put it in context too, he hadn't just been working with the Coen brothers, but he'd just come off shooting Big, When Harry Met Sally, and Misery, which
Rob Reiner, friend of the show.
There you go, right? And so, I mean, he is on this terrific run and starts his, directing career basically after this. That's why he doesn't do any more films with the Coen brothers. But yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of elements which, lend credibility to how this movie looks and feels, besides just the framing and the way it's shot, which is great, and the way that he punches up certain colors. There's obviously a lot of green in this movie, but I mean, a lot of the set designs, we talked about how it was shot in New Orleans because it gave that sense of 1920s big East Coast-ish city. I don't know that we ever really know where this is supposed to take place.
I don't think we do. Yeah.
But it's definitely got a lot of stuff that looks the part, including a lot of the sets in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, along with some of the blowback that this movie got originally from its sort of complicated story. I pulled a quote of Roger Ebert saying, this doesn't look like a gangster movie. It looks like a commercial intended to look like a gangster movie. And I don't agree. Like, I feel like part of what's so wonderful about this film is that it's so sumptuous in the way that it looks and the way that the costumes are designed. And it's sort of, maybe this is sort of one of those things that resonates more today in kind of like, let's call it like a post Mad Men world, where it's just like there's that style of like just like really great sets and furniture and costumes and well-tailored suits can really elevate something. So I see that as a plus rather than a negative. But I'm curious about what y'all have to say to that.
So 2 points. The first one is I've never heard you say y'all before today, so there clearly must be an influence from the movie. The second thing is I think there's nothing about this movie that requires me to know where it takes place. Like there's nothing that depends on it. So it could be anywhere, and I think that's actually a feature and not a bug. I think it is great that it's so generic. It's a town. It's not even a huge town. They don't show massive monuments, buildings. It's a city, and it's got woods around it. Okay, that's all I need to know, and I was so happy to go along with that. Like compared to if it's something that kind of supposed to be this big particular city in a particular point of time, and then you criticize it because it's that's not realistic because that's not what happened. Here, I think the fact that it's so anonymous is actually it works in its favor instead of the other way around.
It's interesting. I took that because I read that same Roger Ebert quote about it feeling more like a commercial for gangster movies. I didn't take that to mean like literally the way it looks so much as like the tone of the movie. And I think that's where I'm just like something didn't quite feel right to me. And we kind of been talking about a bunch of reasons why, where I'm like, it feels like they're doing pretending to do a gangster movie rather than doing a gangster movie. So it felt a little bit off. So I can kind of get that one. For me, a lot of the set design was great. At times I was like, but would Tom really live in a place that big? Because his apartment is huge.
Well, that apartments were a lot bigger back then, right? I mean, that's just nobody was living in. You were either living in like boarding houses. Nobody was living in like micro condos.
And he's the number 2 guy to the number 1 guy.
That's
so
true.
If anyone's going to have a big apartment, it's going to be him.
Yeah, I mean, I found the same thing with Leo's office too, where it was the like, all right, he's got a massive office that you would think is like a CEO's office upstairs at a 1920s Prohibition era club. I'm like, okay. I mean, it's a
he-
beautiful
he-
office.
yeah,
Does
I
this
mean,
feel right?
He is a CEO though, right? Like he's the crime and executive officer. He's the guy who brings the mayor and the
Chief
police
exploitation officer. Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, of course he's the guy who is calling the shots, and it makes perfect sense to me. Especially when you see Casper, who is like supposed to be, not as big, and he's got this huge mansion and with fireplaces in his study where with readily available things to beat henchmen to death with. So yeah, I'll buy that.
It's an important note to keep if anybody is hoping to be a 1920s crime boss, that if you are buying, fireplace accessories, make sure all of them are good for beating your henchmen to death with. So I'm interested for both of you. I mean, I think we already kind of talked about it up front. This was a movie that came out 2 weeks, not even 2 weeks after Goodfellas. Is that the biggest thing that you think kind of makes the traction of this movie sputter out, or do you think there's something else that's feeding into why this movie wasn't more successful?
And it's a good question. Like you've got Goodfellas. I don't know how much advertising and promotion was put into this film at the time as well, so that could have been a factor. There's also the fact that the Coen brothers are relatively unknown-ish at that time. It's not a big movie. Like, again, it's like a $14 million budget. So it's not got a whole lot to kind of grab onto, I guess. And it didn't get amazing reviews. It's sort of like great performances, complicated story. So, there feels like there's a number of different factors that are coming in here to sort of just kind of make it kind of flatline a little bit.
I think it is such a tricky challenge because it's like a movie like this. You either have to mislead people to make it seem like something it's not to get them into the theater, in which case you might get people in an opening weekend, but they're all going to come back and say, this is not at all what I expected. Or you try to be super accurate in your trailers about what it is, and you're not going to get anyone in because it's like you said, competing with the movies at the time. Like, how would that possibly survive? And I keep thinking about this thing that we talked about in Bruges, where you have these posters that say, shoot first, sight see later, and you go like, how is that possibly an accurate depiction of what this movie is? Like, you're trying to come up with some clever line to capture a movie like this that is so complex and so layered. I have no idea what you would do. So I think a lot of it is just, how the heck would you even package and market something like this? Because you either win on opening day, you get more people in, and then you risk them walking and being like, I don't know what the heck this was, or vice versa.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? Like, Evan kind of touched on it, where you've got, newish directors who have a little bit of, rep or whatever, but it's not like Raising Arizona made $200 million or something like that. And then you're going up against, Martin Scorsese with Robert De Niro and whatever. But, and also maybe, I don't know how much of it would be different if maybe you were doing like The Untouchables, where you're like, it's Al Capone, and like maybe more reputable names or whatever, like names that people would know, as opposed to like 1920s crime guys. And you're like, oh, okay. And like Gabriel Byrne, who dat? I don't know. Who's this guy? I think there's just a lot of those kind of like not quite as, well known as, and you go across like director, actor, topic, and a bunch of those things where I can see, as those add up, you're like, I'll skip it. But yeah, it's interesting. Like, certainly not a movie that I disliked, but it's an interesting one for me, especially going in knowing that both of you were, very much enamored with this movie, where I was like, I thought it was fine. I just had a lot of spots where it didn't land for me. I'm likely not going to be revisiting this movie. I don't think that's a surprise. I thought I was all right, but I'm not going to come back to it. But I'm guessing both of you are going to be coming back to this at some point before too long.
Oh, heck yeah. I'm thrilled that I watched it again, and it made me go like, oh man, this is a great movie. Tanya's never seen it, so I'm happy to sit down and watch it with her. Even in the next couple of weeks.
Same here. I would rewatch it anytime. It makes me happy. There's so many things that I like to just watch again and see how it's done, the story, how it plays out. So yes, I will definitely come back to this.
Well, maybe what we'll have to do is when we figure out what month we're going to do Coen Brothers month in and stack them up. If we can't find enough Coen Brothers movies that we haven't seen, we'll have to watch this again and see if I get it better that time when we watch it.
And I'm like, Chris, how did you not get this the first time? How did you not get this?
Yeah. And I'm like, still no, don't like it. Nope, don't think so. That is probably a good place to call it, I think. So that is what we thought about Miller's Crossing. So if you had different thoughts about this movie, if you feel like I have double crossed you and want to come after me, well, you can find us on Twitter at How Did You Miss This? That's HDYMT_pod. And while you're there, you can take a look at some of the stuff that we're planning on watching, that we have watched. Send us questions, thoughts. And hey, if there's a movie that you might have missed that you want us to take a look at, let us know. If you enjoy what we're doing, do us a favor. Take a second, rate, review, subscribe, or whatever other magic you can work wherever you happen to be listening to this. And we'll be back next week when we're going to be watching Harold and Maude. And we're going to see whether this cult classic is worth living for, or whether this is a movie that should stay missed. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you then.
Boom, 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 boom. Yeah.